The rain had fallen without cease for 3 days, draping the grand estate of Netherby Hall in a persistent grey mist that blurred the edges of the sprawling gardens and soaked into the heavy stone walls with a relentless persistence. The great oaks and elms outside bowed beneath the weight of water, their branches forming drips and rivulets that plummeted with a dull patter onto the slate roofs below. Nets of fog curled in the hollows of the grounds, restless as the whispered rumours that already ran like wildfires through the glittering crowd gathered beneath the great oak-panelled ceilings of Netherby's drawing rooms. Clarissa Arrington arrived at last reluctantly, apprehensively, her slender feet pressing gingerly into the polished marble foyer as she took her first breath of the heavy perfumed air that marked the entry to the season's most anticipated house party. Her carriage, when it pulled up, had slid nearly sideways through the muddy drive, the wheels locked in a reluctant battle with the sodden earth. Now, here she was, stepping out into this world of formed smiles and concealed daggers, a soft flush burning on her cheeks that neither the chill nor the tension could quell. Her chestnut hair had been temporarily wrestled into obedience, pinned up in a loose Regency knot, slender curls framing the clever blue eyes that never quite let a glance go unrewarded with scrutiny. She felt the faint tug of the thin scar near her left temple, a reminder of a youthful accident, a mark that made her less invisible among the polished faces of the ton. Not all dared to look closely enough to notice it, but she knew that it set her apart in subtle ways. More than once people had commented that it lent her an air of unintended vulnerability, a chink in the armour that Clarissa herself had no intention of revealing. Inside the decorated hall, the heat from the great fireplaces pressed against the damp chill that no storm could fully chase away. The air thrummed with anticipation and rivalry, and Clarissa's gaze caught sight of her sister Eleanor. Immediately, there she stood by the grand mirror in the great salon, an apparition of triumph and calculated cruelty. Eleanor was radiant, her glossy black hair piled in intricate coils and ringlets that sparkled beneath the candlelight like woven silk webs. The pearl necklace, hugging her slender throat, flashed with a quiet arrogance, as though daring anyone who dared whisper truths against her to challenge the wealth and craftiness she wielded as both shield and weapon. Eleanor's eyes were sharp green flames, watching, calculating, maliciously gleaming with the satisfaction of a new conquest perfectly executed. The gown she wore was the talk of the ton already. Layers of shimmering cream, silk and delicate lace arranged so every turn revealed some bit of gleaming seam or embroidered detail. It was the season gown, and Eleanor draped herself in its finery with the assured grace of a queen claiming her throne. Some whispered that she had spent an entire fortnight in secret fittings, and likely more than that in forging the connections, backroom promises, and whispered deals that made it hers. Clarissa tried to swallow the bitter twist of envy. The low pulse of frustration curled in her chest. It was hard to reconcile that this woman, her sister, could wear the gown that bore a fortune's price and wield it like a blade, while Clarissa herself remained so unadorned, so defined by wit and steady reserve rather than the glittering, shallow pleasures of status. The subtle contrast between the sisters had never been more marked than in this crowded room, where admirers and would-be suitors floated like moths to Eleanor's pyre of ambition and opulence. Just then, a voice cut through the hum of polite conversation that threatened to drown Clarissa's uneasy thoughts. Viscount Ainsley stood near the hearth, his lean frame angled against the polished marble mantel as his dark chestnut hair tousled ever so slightly under the heavy air. His hazel eyes, shadowed by a perpetually furrowed brow, swept the room with a gaze that missed nothing and held nothing in much affection. His hawk-shaped nose caught the gleam of candlelight, and a faint scar along his right cheekbone lent him an unfinished hardness that only enhanced his smouldering allure. He spoke before anyone addressed him. His voice was low, measured, but carried a sharpness that sliced through the genteel murmurs like a scalpel through silk. "Miss Arrington," he said, his eyes pinning Clarissa with a clear but unspoken challenge, "I find it necessary to amuse myself with a wager on the wit and fortune you carry into this season. One would hope you are equal to the expectations thrown about in the salons." The room seemed to still for a moment. Then a rush of whispers spiraled like eddies around Clarissa's guarded stance. The tongue was quick to catch scent of scandal, certainly quicker when spoken with the sharp barbs of a notorious man such as Viscount Ainsley. His remark was not a mere jest. It was a calculated stone dropped into the pool of reputations. Clarissa felt the faint stir of fire within. How daring, she thought, to make such a statement before the assembled elite, where every word was weaponized, every glance weighed and measured. And yet, the coolness in her veins did not betray the hint of surprise that roiled beneath. She lifted her chin and met his gaze with all the composed disdain she could muster. "Viscount," she replied, voice steady and clear, "I should hope my reputation precedes me better than the frivolities of wagers and whispers. The season is long, and fortunes can shift as swiftly as the tide. I trust your judgment to discern which place I might hold within it." His brow lifted in what might have been amusement, or was it grudging respect? He gave a curt nod, then turned away with the measured grace of a man who had said enough for the moment. Eleanor's laugh, sharp as a finely honed blade, cut under the polite murmurs. "Always the clever one, is she not? One wonders whether wit alone will carry her as well as it has served you, Viscount." Her gaze settled on Clarissa, with a mixture of amusement and disdain, as if measuring the worth of a weapon held against her own. Guests around began to lean in, whispers cascading like dry leaves. Could the younger sister truly outshine Eleanor's overt charms? Would the Viscount's harsh verdict hold sway? The questions crackled in the charged air like the electric hum before a storm's lightning strike. Clarissa stood calm, yet the scar near her temple seemed to pulse with the weight of what she carried beneath her measured exterior, something no gown could mask and no whisper undo. Beneath the surface, the secret of their mother's past churned like a hidden undertow, threatening to reshape the fragile tides of their fortunes and fates. The morning that followed was no less tense. Clarissa awoke to a grey dawn, streaked with the heavy drizzle that reminded her of the night, persistent, unyielding. The air in Netherby Hall was thick with unease, as though the storm had seeped into the very stone walls and set the household edge about with nerves. She dressed quietly in soft muslin, choosing a gown pale as morning fog that betrayed none of the restless fire within her heart. Her movements were measured and controlled, practiced gestures, polished by years of navigating the razor edges of polite society. When she arrived for morning call, the drawing-room was already filling, her sister at its centre, like a queen among courtiers. Eleanor's sharp green eyes caught Clarissa's entrance immediately. There was no sisterly warmth in the look that followed, only the keen gleam of ambition and strategy. "Clarissa," Eleanor purred, approaching with the grace of a cat stalking prey, "I trust you are well rested. The season's trials shall be many, and fortitude will serve you better than mere wit alone." Clarissa inclined her head, the faint edge of coolness in her voice, designed to keep Eleanor's claws momentarily sheathed. "Indeed. And I trust your confidence in the season is on par with your gown's magnificence." Eleanor's smile was thin, her eyes flashing with a glint of malice. "Fortune depends on choices made, and I am resolved to make mine wisely. Viscount Ainsley is a man of considerable influence and placement." Clarissa's heart beat unevenly. She had overheard far more than she ought when Eleanor had spoken in quiet corners of courtship, schemes to secure the family fortune by weaving herself into the Viscount's fortune and influence. It was no secret that Eleanor's ambitions often brushed close to the ruthless, but to hear them articulated, still cut deep. "I see," Clarissa said, keeping her tone polite but firm. "His attentions are indeed valuable. But one wonders who truly holds the advantage when fortunes are wagered upon." "Clever girl," Eleanor responded loftily. "I expect the advantage ensures itself when properly grasped. Viscount Ainsley is no fool despite his reserved manner. He seeks strength and fortune, as do we all. One must simply place herself where the prize rests." Clarissa noted then the way the Viscount watched from across the room, his gaze dark and unreadable. He had caught the edge of their exchange, and there was something more in his eyes now, a flicker of interest mingled with his habitual wariness. The rigid set of his jaw softened ever so slightly as he regarded her composed restraint. It was a quiet kind of battle they waged, words and wit circling like sparring blades, each testing the other's defences. Clarissa's strength lay not in the flashy displays of wealth or ostentation, but in intelligence, control, and an understanding of the unspoken power that lurked beneath. "Your composure, Miss Arrington," Viscount Ainsley observed when their eyes met across the room moments later, "is as evident as your reputation is whispered. You wield your restraint with the precision of a practiced swordswoman. It is unusual to find someone so measured in a season ruled by excess." Clarissa inclined her head, intrigued despite herself. "And you, Viscount, seldom dress yourself in anything but curt remarks and a furrowed brow. I imagine the ton's judgments weigh heavily upon you as well." His lips twitched in the shadow of a smile, but he said nothing more. Instead, the tension settled into a more fragile truce, a tacit acknowledgement that beneath the grand designs and cutting wagers, a more complicated game was unfolding, one where hearts, reputations, and secrets were the true stakes. Clarissa felt the slow burn of resolve kindle within her this season. She would not be defined by the gowns she wore or the whispers that followed. She carried within her something far more potent, an inheritance of truth and strength, born from the shadows of their mother's secrets. What that would mean for the coming days, she could not yet say. But she was determined to meet every challenge with the grace and fire that was uniquely her own. Clarissa stood beneath the umbrella's narrow dome, grey skies pressing down around them, and the relentless drizzle blurring the edges of the garden's clipped boxwood hedges and gravel paths. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and crushed blooms, mingled with the faint, unyielding chill of an English spring gone unexpected. The steady patter of rain created a soundscape that felt both intimate and urgent, as if the very weather conspired to wash away pretense and reveal what lay beneath. Viscount Ainsley walked beside her, the hem of his dark riding coat dampening where the drops escaped the umbrella's shelter. His sharp gaze was fixed ahead, but there was a tension in the set of his jaw, a restlessness that the calm countryside did nothing to soothe. For a moment, Clarissa thought the rain might finally break through his guarded demeanour, and she allowed herself a flicker of hope. "You continue to deny the wager," he said, voice low and steady despite the storm. "Your refusal to engage is both maddening and impressive, Miss Arrington. You wield your silence like a shield, yet others whisper that your grandmother's tale is but a legend, a parlour game for those who enjoy seeing you caught in this season's cruel theatre." Clarissa lifted her chin, the damp curls at her temples clinging to cool skin. The sharp lightning in her blue eyes mirrored the flash of a retort, practiced and precise. "Viscount, legends are often more potent than the truths they hide, but to call it a game You do yourself a grave disservice by assuming the stakes matter only to me. Tell me, how often have you found yourself a pawn rather than the player? He glanced at her. Then his deep hazel eyes briefly shadowed with something unspoken, perhaps admission. More than I care to count, he murmured. Yet I do not conceal behind silence. I prefer my words like my wages, calculated, deliberate, and when required, bold. Your denial, however, strikes me as a measured dance to avoid the inevitable. Her laugh was soft, but edged with defiance. Bold? You mistake curt deflection for bravery. I will not be baited into confirming rumors that serve only to chain me to a past I have no wish to parade. Her voice softened slightly. Besides, if the ton expects scandal, they will settle for whispered slights rather than outright truths. I intend to deprive them of both. Ainsley's mouth twitched with the ghost of a smile, though his brows knit more deeply, as if the rain was not the only storm crowding the space between them. You are not so resolute in all matters, I suspect. That keen mind of yours, sharp as a rapier, is ill-served by such measured restraint. Secrets, your family's or otherwise, can be weapons as well as shackles. Why deny your hand? Clarissa met his gaze squarely, the ghost of the scar on her left temple, catching a droplet of water and turning it momentarily silver in the muted light. Because not every secret needs to be brandished for public consumption. Strength, Viscount, sometimes lies not in revealing the truth, but in choosing when to keep it. The rain intensified an unrelenting rhythm against the fabric of their protection, and yet neither moved to increase the space between their umbrellas. The air thrummed with possibility, and the aching awareness that this exchange, this verbal duel set against nature's fury, was a rare and fragile moment of unguarded truth. He sighed, voice low, but with a trace of admiration. You possess a wit as quick and sharp as lightning, Clarissa. Too often, I mistake your silence for ignorance or fear, neither of which is true. You simply refuse to indulge the watchers and gossipers who would prefer your downfall for their amusement. Her eyes softened briefly, a flicker of gratitude mingling with caution. And you, Viscount, despite your reluctance to lower your guard, betray a sympathy that flies too close to the sun for convenience. Tell me honestly, do you find this all tiresome as well? Ainsley met her gaze, the storm reflecting in the depths of his eyes. Every moment, more so for knowing there might be more beneath the polished veneer, more worth fighting for than mere social posturing. Perhaps it is folly, but I find myself intrigued by the armor you wear so well. The rain fell more steadily now, washing away the distance between them until only the charged silence remained, heavy with unspoken promises and understanding. Clarissa swallowed hard, quickening under the weight of the tempest and the man beside her. I regret, I must confess, she said softly, that the season and the storm are far from kind. But I find, too, that they reveal who we truly are beneath the trappings and the gossip. He nodded, glancing toward the distant house where the remaining carriages waited out the weather. Then perhaps, Miss Arrington, there is a chance that beneath all these clouds, truth might find a way to shine through. She smiled subtly. Polt, but challenge clear in her eyes. We shall see, Viscount. The grand ballroom glimmered despite the storm's violent assault on the old estate. Crystals hanging from the chandeliers caught flickers of candlelight as the tempest raged beyond tall, mullioned windows, sending intermittent gusts rattling their panes. The air was warm with heat from the roaring fires and the slow hum of soft conversation from the assembled company. Outside, the deluge unleashed itself with renewed vigor, but inside, society's polish shimmered as brightly as ever. Clarissa entered, with quiet grace, her gown modest, yet impeccably crafted, a subtle slate blue that brought out the sharp brilliance in her eyes without calling undue attention. Her posture was flawless, despite the knot of tension that gnawed at her stomach. Every whispered remark, every sideways glance pointed toward Eleanor's latest audacious display, a gown of shimmering emerald and gold, constructed by the most sought-after Parisian dressmaker. The pearls draped at Eleanor's throat caught the light with haughty brilliance, signaling not only wealth but ruthlessness, an open announcement of the family's power and its unyielding ambitions. Eleanor moved through the room like a predator well accustomed to her domain, sweeping past the clusters of society's watchful eyes, with a thin smile that promised both favor and betrayal in equal measure. The whispers followed her like shadows, too loud to be ignored. "They say the wager was spoken aloud," one lady murmured behind a fan, "and Mrs. Arrington's daughters have become the careful battleground for the ton's amusement. Such a pity, especially as Eleanor dares to flaunt their mother's faded name, as if it were her own." Another voice joined, softer but no less venomous. "Clarissa's refusal to rise to provocation only stokes the fire further. No one contests Eleanor's claim to the season's brightest star, it seems. Yet the younger sister's restraint is becoming the more talked-of recalcitrance." Clarissa's breath caught not from cold, as might have been guessed from the damp whirls of rain still clinging to her sleeves, but from the razor's edge of every murmured observation. The elegance of withholding, the discipline of dignified silence, all felt placed under a magnifying glass. To be measured and reserved was often mistaken for weakness when viewed through the lens of gossip and rivalry. Viscount Ainsley appeared at the threshold, his presence immediate and discreet. The bustle of the room seemed to falter for a heartbeat when his gaze found her, dark eyes shadowed, yet unmistakably fixed. He moved toward her, the familiar furrow of his brow less severe in the warm candlelight. "You endure well," he said quietly, voice low enough that only she might hear. "Such elegance under siege commands not only respect, but curiosity. I find myself wondering how much of you is steel beneath silk." Clarissa met his gaze, feeling the flood of conflicting emotions twisting in her chest, the bitter taste of scrutiny, the flickering spark of defiance, and an undercurrent of something far deeper. "Viscount," she replied, "to weather society's tempests without a sail to catch the wind is no small feat, but I am no stranger to storms of all kinds, and nature has a curious way of stripping pretense away, revealing who stands firm and who falls." He inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement that their unspoken understanding transcended the crowded room's cloying atmosphere. Eleanor's triumphant laugh rippled across the room from a dais, where she held court in the glare of Copley's finest jewel. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Clarissa with a knowing smirk, one that spelled challenge and disdain. Yet Clarissa felt only a mild inclination to disdain in return, tempered by resolve. She was no longer the naive girl who might have been rattled by such open provocation. Instead, she turned to meet Eleanor's gaze with the quiet defiance of one who carried unseen burdens and unheralded strength. Viscount's glance lingered on her with increasing intensity. There was an invisible thread pulling taut between them, something fragile yet unbreakable, forged in the storm's echo and society's glare. As the night deepened and the music swelled amid the shadows cast by crystal and flame, Clarissa found her thoughts inexorably drawn to the man who saw beyond the gowns, beyond the whispers, and dared to reckon with the quiet fire that burned beneath. Their dance was far from over, and the season's harshest test was yet to come. But for now, beneath the storm's raging heart, a tentative alliance had been forged, dawn-born not of convenience, but of respect, truth, and the shared understanding that some secrets must be carried with grace and others boldly revealed. The library felt like a sanctuary cloaked in shadow, and the faint mustiness of well-thumbed leather and aged paper. Heavy curtains, drawn against the relentless rain battering the windows, muffled the distant murmur of voices and the spirited laughter that still rippled from the ballroom. Clarissa perched on the edge of an upholstered armchair, fingers clenching the worn edge of a table. Across from her, Viscount Ainsley held a slender ivory card between his long fingers, his dark eyes narrowing as he studied the hand before him, a subtle challenge lingering beneath the politeness so often displayed in public. "So," Clarissa began, her voice low, the flicker of a candle horizon casting soft shadows on her determined face, "you play as if every card you lay down must be a calculated risk, as if the game itself were a ledger to be balanced." Ainsley's gaze lifted, briefly meeting hers with an intensity that had little to do with the cards and more to do with everything they had refused to voice all night. "Is there another way to play?" His question was soft, almost curious. She smirked, folding her own cards. "There is. I prefer to gamble on truth, even when it's a poor hand." The words hovered between them, a fragile tension skirting the edges of confrontation and admission. For a moment, Ainsley's expression shifted, those deep hazel eyes darkening, revealing traces of a past he usually cloaked behind a mask of sardonic wit. And yet, here we are, surrounded by lies and half-truths, masquerading as polite conversation. Clarissa's sharp blue eyes narrowed, every inch the heiress, accustomed to unpicking the veil society draped over her. "Lies of your making, I suspect. After all, it's your wager that darkens every room you enter." He leaned back slightly, the subtle scar on his cheek catching the candlelight, a faint shadow of old wounds. She nodded crisply. "I know about the bet, the terms, the stakes. It seems, Lord Ainsley, that the ton delights in painting you as a man who rakes through ruin for sport." His laugh was dry, almost bitter. Sport is often the only solace for a man burdened with mistakes. His eyes flickered with raw vulnerability, the curt distance melting for a brief instant. "You know nothing of those mistakes. More than you'd like," Clarissa said quietly. "A man who gambled away his inheritance, who lost more than just money, his name, his family's trust. And yet you arrive here, cloaked in the trappings of nobility, daring to pretend the past does not haunt you. Because," he said, voice low, "the past is what it is, but the present," he paused, searching her face with intent, "can be tempered by choice." Clarissa leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the candlelight. "Choice? Or deflection? You wagered on my sister's reputation to rebuild your own standing." Ainsley's brows knitted tightly. There was no satisfaction in the exchange, only the late, bruised ache of truth laid bare. "I thought, to expose folly, not ruin lives, but perhaps I am the greater fool." She caught the flicker of something far deeper beneath the guarded exterior, regret, shame, something painfully human, and for a heartbeat, the icy walls she'd built around her own heart cracked. "Foolishness rarely strikes in isolation," she said softly. "There is always a truer victim in the game." He studied her like a distant storm brewing, conflicted and uncertain. "You mean, Eleanor?" Clarissa's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, her mind spinning with the delicate dance of social expectation and family loyalty. "She hides behind ambition and jewels, but she is no innocent, not when she clutches at power with such desperate hunger. And yet," Ainsley's voice was low and ragged, "you protect her." "I protect my family," she replied, the steel in her tone softening only for a moment. "Even if that means carrying burdens no one else can see." A silence settled between them, the room shrinking, until all that remained was the quiet turmoil of two souls wrestling with their truths. The rain tapped insistently against the window panes, a relentless reminder of the storm outside and within. Finally, Ainsley broke the stillness. "You are not as fragile as you let the ton believe." "And you," she countered, "hide your scars beneath wit and distance, but I see them." He smiled briefly, the gesture tinged with vulnerability and something unspoken. "Then you are as dangerous as they say." For the first time that evening, their sparring felt less like combat and more like a tentative bridge being built across a chasm of loneliness and guarded secrets. The cards lay forgotten on the table, eclipsed by the quiet understanding kindling between them. By morning, the storm outside had eased to a torrential downpour that hammered against the sprawling estate, as if nature itself conspired to drown out urgent whispers. Clarissa found herself adrift, in a sea of speculative murmurs and sidelong glances flitting through the endless corridors and gilded salons. The ton was abuzz with a single incendiary detail: Eleanor's announcement, or so the rumour insisted, that she intended to declare her engagement to Viscount Ainsley. The news struck Clarissa with a crushing weight, her heart convulsing between disbelief and a bitter twitch of dread. She paced in the solitude of her sitting room, the damp cold seeping through the heavy drapes. Her mind swirled relentlessly, unravelling threads of gossip and half-heard confidences, the truth urgent and terrible. Lord Ainsley, once a man merely cloaked in scandal, was now tangled irrevocably with Eleanor's ruthless designs. The wager, she realised with sick clarity, was fuelled not by chance or momentary whim, but by desperation, her sister's desperate ambition. A gambit to claw free from the suffocating debt and disgrace their father had swallowed, dragging their family into the lingering shadows of ruin. Her hands trembled as she touched the small scar near her temple, an emblem of past trials and silent endurance. What was her duty now? To stand aside and watch the world she had fought to navigate crumble beneath schemes woven from greed and fear, or to act, to unravel the poisoned web sewn carefully by Eleanor's hand before it strangled everything she held dear. Clarissa stole a breath, swallowing the tempest rising within. If she intervened, she would risk the fragile respect she had just begun to claim in this unforgiving society. But if she remained silent, she would be complicit in a betrayal that reached far beyond mere propriety. Her thoughts drifted to Lord Ainsley, the man who bore his own scars and flaws like a reluctant armour. He was no angel, but neither was he a monster. Beneath his guarded facade, she had glimpsed something rare, a difficult, troubled dignity and a willingness to bear the weight of his failings rather than hide them. The hallways buzzed anew as guests moved about, their faces masks of curiosity and veiled malice. Eleanor passed by with her customary sharp grace, the pearl necklace gleaming like a crown of thorns around her throat, her smirk a quiet declaration of victory. The whispers reached Clarissa again, carried on soft currents from one corner of the room to another. The Viscount will make a prudent match. Eleanor's fortune combined with his title. It's the talk of the ton, and a brilliant stratagem at that. Clarissa clenched her fists, the bitter taste of betrayal sharper than the finest port. She recalled the moments in the library, the rare fragments of truth she had wrested from Ainsley's guarded demeanour. The man at the centre of this storm was broken, yes, but not broken enough to be a pawn. There was defiance in him yet, and perhaps a kindred spirit, forged from hardship and resilience. Her mind raced, weighing the stakes. To challenge Eleanor publicly would invite ruin on them all. Her sister's fragile societal standing, the delicate balance of their family's fragile honour, even her own precarious place in this merciless game. But to let this engagement proceed unchecked was to surrender all hope of authentic redemption and love. Clarissa's jaw clenched. If the Tun's whispers were true, if Eleanor truly aimed to bind herself to Ainsley for ambition's sake, then Clarissa must prepare to reveal the deeper truths lurking beneath the glittering facade: debts, the wagers, the desperate measures taken in the shadows. But how much of the secret could she afford to unveil without shattering everything? How much of her family's guarded past could she bear to carry into the unforgiving light? The storm outside redoubled its fierce tempo, rain cascading down like tears unbidden, and as lightning split the darkened sky, Clarissa understood. The season's fiercest trial was imminent. Her choice was no longer between safety and danger, but between silence and the risk of ruin, for herself, for Ainsley, for her family, and in that choice she saw the fragile threads of hope flicker amidst the storm. With a steadying breath, she resolved, some secrets might be borne with grace, but others must be wielded as weapons. The delicate dance of the season would not end with civility or whispered gossip, it would end in truth. The rain pounded relentlessly against the glass of the drawing-room windows, but Clarissa found herself drawn outside, compelled by a restless need she couldn't quite name. Her skirt swished softly over the soaked gravel as she crossed the grounds toward the garden, the storm's roar filling every silent void that had settled in her mind since the last dreadful conversation. Through the curtain of rain, she saw a figure standing beneath the twisted branches of an ancient oak, clean, stubborn, unmistakably the Viscount Ainsley. He did not flinch nor seek shelter, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes staring out into the grey tempest, as if challenging it to break him. Something about the sight unsettled her, made the tension that had woven between them over these 2 fraught weeks crack in the rain's steady percussion. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Clarissa ventured, drawing closer, her voice low but steady over the storm. Ainsley turned, then those deep hazel eyes locking with hers. "I might have expected you only if your intrusion were less welcome," he said dryly, but there was no edge to the words. Instead, a flicker of something almost vulnerable slipped across his features before the habitual furrow knitted once more between his brows. Clarissa stepped beneath the shelter of a stone colonnade, rain cascading off the eaves in small torrents between them. "Do you always greet a storm with such self-imposed solitude?" she asked, an ironic twist to her voice. "Or is that your preferred method of escape, standing bare to the elements to match your insolent reputation?" His jaw twitched in a hint of humour, but his eyes darkened with something fierce and quietly guarded. "And you find my reputation insolent? I would say arrogant," she countered, folding her arms, her gaze never wavering. "You hold your opinions like a sword, cutting through conventions and courtesies alike with sometimes reckless abandon. It makes you dangerous, more dangerous than any gambit I have ever encountered in the Tun." Ainsley's laugh was low, almost bitter, and he shook his head. "Dangerous or not, you've survived the season's storms unlike most. That sharp tongue of yours has kept you from becoming collateral in a game played by fools." Clarissa's lips pressed into a thin line. "And that is precisely why, despite your many faults, I cannot simply dismiss you as another obstacle in my family's perilous dance." He considered her, the rain blurring the edges of his face but never dimming the intense flame beneath. "You have no idea what you're stepping into, perhaps," she whispered, "but neither do you. Or maybe you do, and that's why you're still here, refusing to walk away, like most would." A silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of words unsaid, wounds barely covered, and truths half admitted. The storm, once a cacophony, softened to an insistent patter as though nature itself held its breath in anticipation. "Why do you hate me so brutally?" Ainsley's voice was flawed with a rawness neither had dared reveal before. Clarissa's sharp eyes softened momentarily. "I don't hate you. I despise the arrogance you wear like armor, the arrogance that blinds you to the shadows lurking beneath our polished surfaces. But I admire your resilience. I admire that you never surrender, no matter how cruel the hand dealt." He took a cautious step closer, the rain seeming no less harsh, but something in the proximity shifted, a delicate thaw where frost had long held firm. "And I," he admitted quietly, "admire your strength where others see only fragility. You walk a tightrope of peril and grace, Clarissa. I was wrong to assume you would fall." Clarissa met his gaze squarely, the sharp scar above her temple catching the sparse light. "And I was wrong to believe you immune to the complexities of honor and love." A flicker of a smile brushed Ainsley's scarred cheek, tentative but genuine. "A fragile truce, then." She inclined her head ever so slightly, a wry smile touching her lips. "Fragile, yes, but perhaps a beginning." The garden seemed to hold its breath with them, the storm easing into a gentle murmur, as if granting them this slender reprieve from the unrelenting season. Clarissa felt the heavy burden lighten just enough to allow a glimmer of something